It's great to be here and to be in New York again, so thank you very much. Hi, Esther. Lots of friends here, so that's a great thing. I'm delighted to be here to speak to you today. The mesh is, some of you who are geeks like me, by way of confession, may be used to using the word more technically. But essentially for me, the mesh is a fundamental shift in our relationship with the stuff in our lives, in our personal lives, in our communities, in our businesses. Last century's model was a lot about aspiring towards and longing for ownership of things often. And the proposition is that this is a moment in which access triumphs ownership when it comes to goods and services, and perhaps more. I see the mesh, there's some key tenets, and one of them is it's about the pursuit of better things easily shared. That is, the design, we're going to rethink the design of things and actually create better things. But we're also going to fundamentally think about the fact that things need to be shared, that goods, services, and access to people, that we're going to start to see that we actually as a global community already have a lot. And that if we could increase our ability to access what we already have and repurpose what we already have, we will discover that there's a whole new world for us. So we have a long history of sharing, especially in cities. We tend to share a lot. But then I also see that all sharing starts and ends with what I refer to as the mother of all share platforms. You might be asking yourself, as I did, how come now? Like, what's driving the mesh? And I think a few things. One, we're moving to 9.3 billion people very shortly. More than 50% of them are going to be in cities. So that basically is more people, lots of, in smaller spaces, tighter spaces, less stuff. Climate change, personal, business, and then in our communities again, we're being harshly invited, if we haven't done it voluntarily, to kind of rethink our relationship to resources. Especially the last decade, and even more aggressively in the last 5 years or so, big brands that seemingly had a lot of our trust for the reason that they were around for a long time have managed to in some way betray us. And so what that's done is also create a crack in the armor and allow new brands and actually individuals and groups or organizations we may not know a lot about, we're actually willing to give them a go, whereas before we maybe weren't so willing. Also the economic downturn, recession, the reset, whatever you call it, the fact that no one knows what the hell's going on with the economy has basically made us kind of look again at the true cost of things relative to the true value and to try to align that. That also is taking place, again, business community level, you know, and personally. And then lastly, this is a historic moment because we are, through these devices, as everyone's made reference to, we are more connected to more people than ever before, unless you're sitting next to them. And then another window into the mesh is essentially it's this kind of soup or cocktail between three things. One, social networks allow us to be very easily connected to each other. Secondly, physical things, like my friend Clay Shirky says, that cities have become legible, that people don't walk around with static maps, but they actually pulsate, that we're able to find people or pop-up stores or food trucks or social events taking place, demonstrations. As I'll refer later, incredible coordination in places. Well, you already discussed, we heard from Egypt, Spain with Democracia Realia. Incredible things are taking place. And we also have technologies that allow us to keep track of things that are moving about that are not human, boxes and cars and bikes and all sorts of things. So that and the fact that we're walking around with these devices sets up and sort of lays track for taking the friction out of sharing. That we're moving into a moment in which sharing is actually more convenient and less costly than ownership. So a good example, I think, and I'll kind of zip quickly through. How many people here have tried either car sharing or bike sharing ever? Welcome to New York. I love it. Okay, so ZipCar, largest car sharing company in the world. Here's why I think they're winning. One is, in the story of a brand as a voice and a product as a souvenir, ZipCar really knows how to make car sharing sexy. That instead of it being like I should really do this so I don't feel like crap, they come out with ads like 350 hours a week, having a year. It should be a week. I don't know what life I wish I was living, but having sex, and 420 hours a year looking for parking. Love the ad. It creates a very fresh and aspirational sense of the brand and also of car sharing. But I don't think that's why they're winning. I think they're winning because they understand that they're not in the transportation business, they're in the information business. That when we buy a car, you have one interaction with a dealer and you try to sprint away as quickly as possible. When you deal with Netflix or ZipCar or Boris Bikes in London or any of these mesh companies, there's very recurrent interactions, and the company or the organization has a lot of opportunity to understand what people are asking for and how the products are being used and how to make things better. So the opportunity, and I think the imperative for entrepreneurs and for hopefully people working in government who see themselves entrepreneurially, is to understand how to interact with the actual use data and what we're really doing with these things so that we can continue to create better platforms and better products and services. Another tenet of the mesh is essentially value unused equals waste. So all the crap that's in my garage, like when I wrote the book, I actually had 7 bicycles in my garage, pathetically. All that stuff sitting around, though we think it's valued, and things on P&Ls that the company's not using, including people and IP and all sorts of things, that's actually waste. And so if we can up the utilization of those things, that's when we're creating value. So one of the things in the model with ZipCar, ZipCar actually owns the cars, like Netflix owns the DVDs, and they micro-lease it out to us. In the case of this other phenomenon that's emerged, so any guesses on what % of the day we in North America or Western Europe actually use our cars? Guesses? 2%, wow. It's close to 10, it's 8%. I was surprised. It's interesting because depending on where you are, in like Atlanta, they guessed like 60%. So I think they might use it that much. But in any case, the average is 8%, which basically means that for us individually, the second most costly thing for most of us, our car, 92% of the time sits around unused. So that created this whole other model, which is essentially getting meshy with the things that we already own that we're not using. And so ZipCar, which started about 10 years ago, took 6 years to get 1,000 cars into the network. And a peer-to-peer car-sharing company in the UK called Whipcar, that basically you borrow your neighbor's car, which is pretty genius because the other important thing about car sharing or bike sharing is if you walk 1 or 2 blocks to get it, people will use it, and if you have to walk 4 or 5, you won't. So the car that's near you and available is your neighbor's. In any case, people are making between $250 and $750 a month renting out their car to their neighbor. Both the borrowers and the owners claim that they actually feel good because they feel that they've created a community that they're helping the other person. But Whipcar basically took 6 months, not 6 years, a decade later, to get 1,000 cars into network. So something's happening, and it's happening quickly. As I started to think about better products easily shared and what does that mean, who here remembers the phrase cable-ready TV? Or, Wi-Fi ready notebooks. That's table stakes. And so if we start to look at bicycles and cars and homes and office buildings and all sorts of things, we can begin to imagine that these things are networked, that we have tools for determining how much availability is there, who's using it, how we can parse out a city so it has a dashboard in a way that allows us to be really efficient and to actually share, but being clever about it. One of the challenges is certainly how do we make sharing irresistible? We have experiences in our lives of sharing being irresistible. In this case, this is a shot from about 2 years ago, in the UK, people did a survey and they basically said, you know, the food sucks, the weather sucks, my job sucks, that's all fine. The economy's kind of crappy too, but the thing that really upsets me is I don't even feel like I have a community. And so the organization that took the survey, the Eden Project, created something called the Big Lunch. And it essentially culminated in July of 2009 when over 1 million people came outside of their homes and essentially had lunch with their neighbors. So this is making sharing irresistible. It can be done. Cities or platforms, I guess I know I'm biased to see things as platforms, but I believe that throughout history we have engaged with cities as people coming newly, artists, musicians, entrepreneurs, whomever, and created a voice and a way to sort of inscribe ourselves in cities. And now we start to see things with, for example, open data and the Google API, the Transit API, that we can begin to invite developers and all sorts of people to create, again, newly, tools and interesting things that support the city and support us and our lifestyle. Another idea that I'm quite keen on, this is River Simple. It's a prototype that's being done in the UK. At the moment, it's only in a museum, but it's an open source car. The idea being that we start to really imagine ourselves in creating a platform. I look at the mesh and we're all connected and our things are connected. In that scenario, when you take something out, it's no longer available to me. So it's a very pulsating, very organic and changing phenomenon. So I look to nature for ideas about how the mesh economy may work. And I really like this moniker, which is used very much in ecology. It's waste equals food. So the waste from one system becomes food for the next. And then basically when you have a system imbalance, there is no waste. So we can begin to see if, in case I forget, when I was trying to convince myself not to write the book, which actually took a lot longer than writing the book, I built a database of about 1,200 mesh companies and organizations around the world. That there's a directory online. And it's gone from 1,200 to about 4,000 in the last 6 months or so, but if any of you are interested, there's a lot there to explore. One of the companies is called Park Circa, and it's essentially the idea that parking is difficult and lots of parking spaces are owned by companies or by individuals. So again, unused value equals waste. Let's create a way in which that becomes an asset that we share. Another example is the International Open Data Hackathon. So again, this is a platform in which people all over the world get together and create prototypes and applications, giving some real kind of sense of what's possible when we begin to invent a world around open data. As we get meshier, there's what I like to see as the joy of entanglement. And we certainly have sort of a happy sense of ways in which when we get together as people, some really lovely and powerful things happen. There's a lot of peer-to-peer aspects to the mesh that begin to get interesting. In the US, because of the PUC and the way the laws are currently structured, we can't actually do peer-to-peer power sharing. But we know that that will emerge at some moment. This is a sort of playful power grid that some people were modeling for Paris. A company called Ernicum that is based in Montreal, basically they take the non-recyclable plastic and turn it into clean fuel for vehicles. So again, looking and tapping into our excess or waste and creating real value. In this case, I also want to say real value beyond us sharing our stuff, but when we get really connected and we begin to invent and think together, we also create community. Some examples that we start to see there, this is Oh So We, the guy who started OpenTable just kicked this off a couple, maybe weeks ago. And essentially it's a little social network for neighborhoods. So you can launch it in your neighborhood. Now, a few years ago, we wouldn't have imagined that when you go onto Google, you see search results or tweets. But imagine you want an apple press or a shovel. You go on to whatever your search engine is, and what comes up isn't only the companies that you can buy from and how much it will cost you to ship overnight, but also that your neighbor has shovels and apple presses and they're willing to rent them to you or trade with you something that you have or all sorts of things. And there's a number of these services, Neighbor Goods, Hey Neighbor, Snap Goods, a bunch of them in the US. There's something called a favor bank, which essentially people are just trading favors in the UK called I Can You. And in Germany, they're doing something with France that essentially people are building an inventory of what they have that they're willing to share, and they're creating kind of regional databases of stuff. So as we start to think about, the assets that we have and how to grow and create healthy communities, this is an example I'm quite keen on. It's the Brooklyn Grange Farms. It's an acre of, do you know it? Yes. Oh, good. I love it. It's an acre of organic produce, that's essentially grown on a roof in Brooklyn. One of my favorite things about it is the project got started on the crowdfunding, very ingenious platform of Kickstarter. So it's sort of a double meshy thing. Oops. And so then I would just say there's these sorts of platforms enable sort of something like City Starter, in which we can say, here's a project. It's ways to think about how budgets get managed. So essentially, Kickstarter sets an escrow, essentially, for this project needs $25,000 to be useful, and you can commit to it if you're behind it. If it doesn't get the $25,000, you never put your money in, but if it's oversubscribed or meets its goal, then the project takes place. And I think as a way to think about how budgets get managed in government, that's extremely powerful. It's also very interesting and powerful, I think, to engage the community in terms of what they're willing to back and to create interesting potential private-public partnerships. So in the world of the mesh, we have invested over decades physical, digital, and mobile infrastructure. And so now the capital that's required to start things is much less than there was even 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, I started a company called Ophoto. With a friend of mine, we raised a little less than $60 million from venture capital. Today, if we were doing Ophoto, my calculation is that I would need $3 million to build the company. Because the platforms are in place, I can incrementally get hosting services, fulfillment services, talent, all sorts of things. We're living in a really different and interesting time, and our ability to think differently and to think creatively and be really effective about how we use what we have, I think is fundamental. And so we start to see many different platforms. People are choosing very kind of microcasting. There's many examples. This one is Stumble Safely. Somebody created a little app in Washington, D.C. If you're trying to crawl home from a bar, you basically tweet how you arrived, and people know that you've gotten there safely. So I just thought it was cute, so I put it in. But there's plenty of these, and the idea is essentially that things that scale are actually pretty well tested, refined prior to scaling. The mesh is an active mesh, and so we have government plus citizens plus a platform that equals a community, and that's really the invitation. So when we see the sort of P to G pulse of Democracia Real Ya that's now spread to Sevilla as well as Madrid and Barcelona, we know that something really interesting is happening. We have amazing stories in other parts of the world. When I have my friends in Barcelona and they went into the street and asked people, what do you want? A lot of the answer beyond the manifesto was this: we're not sure, but we know what we don't want. And so I think that the real thing is what we want is we want to be related to each other, and we need to invent something together. Part of the way of getting there is by another source of waste is not sharing failures. And there's a lot of things that have been tried in other parts of the world that don't work, and also successes, of course. So an example, in 2005, Vélib in France was launched in Lyon as a bike-sharing service. It was refined and then moved to Paris in 2007. Now, bike sharing is the fastest growing form of personal transportation around the world, and there are many, many bike-sharing systems all over the place. And no one has had to repeat the experience exactly of Paris or Lyon because we sort of understood what worked and didn't work there. And I think the opportunity for us also, from a government and political perspective, is to do the same. So I just want to say we're at the very beginning. From my perspective, I think this is a huge shift, and we're at the start. I want to welcome all of you on the ride, and thank you very much.